The global podcast economy is estimated to be worth over $7 billion as of 2024, with projections estimated to reach approximately $130 billion by the year 2030. In this episode, we take a deep dive into the evolving role of podcasts in the modern marketing and advertising space. Hello and welcome to CNBC Africa's Marketing Media Money, your front row seat to the marketers, brands, and strategies shaping the future of marketing and advertising in Africa. My name is Kiamo Mosepele. From the unique value in fostering authentic connections to the strategic art of brand alignment, we explore how podcasts are becoming essential tools for marketers. We also unpack the risks and rewards of branded content, the challenges posed by the digital divide, including data costs and accessibility, and examine whether podcasts are truly delivering on engagement and effectiveness. Joining me for more to truly unpack this topic, I am joined by Ron Derby, the PR lead for personal and private banking at Standard Bank, Tebogo Ditshego, the CEO of Ditshego Media, and Ikuchuko Muduka, the CEO of Nelson Reeds, who joins us all the way from Nigeria. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
In my attempt to explore, the day-to-day contentions you both navigate in terms of how brands can incorporate podcasting, the first question that came to mind is the actual definition, which I believe has been at the center of a lot of debate. And, some are on the camp that it can only be a podcast if it presents itself in audio format, while there's a number of video content and, channels that are presenting themselves in video format but dub themselves podcasts. So to open up the discussion fully, I pose it over to you, Ron.
Yeah.
What is a podcast in the current landscape? And secondly, why should brands consider incorporating them in their marketing strategies?
I like to think of podcasts as pretty much similar, guys, to what an iPod once was, and almost its evolution to becoming what is an iPhone, right? So initially, podcasts were just audio tools, but gradually people wanted to see the people in studio, and then it's shifted to become, as I like to think, what podcasts is now become TV, and you'll see TV increasingly becoming podcasts. So that's where podcasts are kind of going eventually again. And for a brand like Standard Bank, where I work, is that, look, there's new platforms are emerging every year on where to tell your story, which is what I am basically here to do at Standard Bank. So it's about exploring all these different platforms. Now, what a vodcast or a podcast offers to a brand like Standard Bank is engagement, critically engagement for any corporate, right? People want to hear our story fully instead of, generally, when it comes to a corporate like a Standard Bank, people only hear from us from press releases, which I generally write, or send statements, or anything regulatory. I was speaking to our fellow panelist here, and he's called Standard Bank rather conservative. But it was generally within the parameters of how a big listed corporation like Standard Bank can only talk. Podcast opens up an opportunity to show, the personality of the people behind the business and what they're doing, and explaining financial services, which is actually something legislatively which banks have to do. So we're dabbling, we're having fun with it. It's only about 18 months where we've really gone and said, okay, look, we used to do some internal podcasts or podcasts for internal staff when we have 55,000 odd people working within the bank. And the past 18 months is where we've started focusing on external podcasts, and where we have like the CEO of Standard Bank, the CEO of my division, chatting and just talking about the world as they see it. A kind of gives them some personality of what Standard Bank is behind this grey, impressive building in Rosebank.
Yeah. I like the fact that you've made a distinction already so early on into the conversation about internal versus external. And I then move over the question over to you, Tebogo. I would argue you have a greater pulse on how much the podcast industry or the media industry has evolved to accommodate this new medium. And as Ron has now mentioned, some of the ways in which the definition has changed, I still would like your opinion on what makes a podcast, but more importantly, as brands are starting to kind of keep their eyes on this medium, how should they approach incorporating podcasts?
Yeah, so podcast is mostly when you're dealing with the audio formats. But there is a connotation now because generally, informally, people are now speaking about podcasts as vodcasts. And a vodcast is when it's in video format. So in terms of how you're supposed to approach it, you're supposed to look at your objectives as a brand. What are you trying to achieve in the various mediums? So what are your objectives? What are you trying to achieve? And then which podcast would be relevant for the content that you'd like to spread? Now, in terms of this comment that brands in South Africa are very conservative, it is the reality of what is happening. I mean, if you look at our industry, you have an issue around transformation that has happened in our industry where approximately 90% of all business is not going to South African companies in the marketing, advertising, and communication space. It is going to international, multinational companies. And that is a very conservative approach because this is how things have been going all along. Now, when we talk about storytelling, it is important for you to tell stories. And we're saying the medium, which could be a vodcast, a podcast, a radio, it can be a billboard. That is the way in which you disseminate the information. But now, in order for you to connect with an audience, you need to work with marketers who understand the audience, people who have literally grown up within the culture that you're working in. And that is one of the issues in terms of how the information is being disseminated, which is why we spoke about the industry being conservative. It's not just one brand being conservative, but the entire industry is conservative.
So I get the sense what you're saying is the climate does not allow for a lot of room for brands who are willing to experiment, who are willing to truly fund or truly back the creative freedom that comes with podcasts, and also it not being in traditional or being wedged into traditional streams of media that are more regulated, that are more I guess, surveilled. Is that what you're essentially saying?
Basically, it's a very deep conversation that speaks about the transformation of our sector. And that transformation includes how you are disseminating your budget. Who are the agencies that you are working with? Where are they based? Who are the owners of the company? It starts right there. And then it goes into whether or not social media and podcasts and vodcasts are regulated. It could be risky because they are not regulated. It could be risky because of the kind of content that they are disseminating. But what is critical is for you to have an understanding of the audience. And that understanding comes from mostly people who have grown up within the environment. And until we realize this, we're going to have an issue in terms of connecting with your target audience. And this is something that we need to look into very seriously, because it doesn't just speak about, whether the brand is able to grow or not, because that is obvious. It does impact whether a brand can grow or not. But it also speaks to our society, creating jobs, uplifting entrepreneurs, transforming the sector. It's very important for us to look into that matter, because this is a structural issue that I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. I think I'd also like to cast the question over further afield to you, Ikechukwu. Is some of the things that Teboho has said about the current landscape and what it allows, its opportunities and challenges, the same for you over in Nigeria? I would assume, as the giant of Africa, you are one of the hubs that are seeing the fastest growth in this area. Are some of the observations that were said today something that rings true for you as well?
In all honesty, I would say not really. So in Nigeria, you are pretty much allowed to experiment with your content, with your media. It doesn't necessarily matter where you are from or where you grew up, as long as you can connect with the people. Just go on Twitter, go on Instagram, see what's happening there, and then connect with them on any level. And if you can speak the language of the young people, of the audience you're trying to reach, then I think it doesn't really matter, where your agency is based or how deeply ingrained you are with, the culture or the people. So I don't quite share his beliefs. Truly.
Sure. But I'd also like to know, from your perspective, would you say, considering how this space continues to grow and has seen quite a considerable rate of growth. Would you say it's a fad, or would you say that podcasts are here to stay and it's something that brands should, treat with urgency?
I mean, so it's not going to be for everybody. That's quite obvious. But there have been stellar cases of podcasts being utilized, excellently to drive business objectives. I would give you an example. We have a client called Bet Niger, who has one of the largest podcasts in Nigeria called Home Turf. And Home Turf has grown in under 10 months to over 1 million subscribers. So that's no longer an experiment. It is validation. It is basically approval from the audience that they want to consume, what content Bet Niger puts out through the podcast. And it's also very interesting because it drives business, right? We're able to use it as a funnel to acquire new customers. We're able to use it as a funnel as well to reactivate players, users who are dormant. So it's not a fad, as far as real life experiences, as far as experimentation have gone, there are brands who are doing stellar jobs with it. And I think people can replicate it if it aligns with, the larger business objectives.
Mm-hmm. So Ikuchuku says it is not a fad. Ron, do you say podcasts have staying power? Do you think the long-term objectives of when a brand would like to incorporate podcasts, do you think there is extensive long-term value that will come out of that decision?
Yeah, look, in this digital age, things are fast moving. I used to want to work for a media company, right? And then my biggest gripe there is that we didn't follow where the readers are going and their consumption habits. Right now, consumption habits are going towards podcasts, and that's where the growth is. So, of course, I think as long as that's still the case, until there's some other new fad, digital, whatever AI brings to us, it is sustainable, and that's where banks go. I mean, corporations and all of us are consume our information from. I mean, they are. I love podcasts. I don't know about any one of you, just like on a personal stance, but it's a place where people are engaged, right? It's 20, 30 minutes of someone listening to your story, whatever your story is, right? I think there's a clarity, I think, within the bank itself. We talk about, people don't want to hear product sales necessarily, so you can't be there just selling our amazing products, which I must say is Standard Bank, but they want to hear issues, talking about high interest rates, low interest rates. But people rather, that is something people want to hear about, the economy and stuff like that. So it's not a product sales function, as I don't think was a podcast are meant for. It's just for deeper lying conversations. And I'd like to think in a South African context, I grew up way in the 80s, right? When they'd have story time on Radio Ukhozi FM, Radio Zulu, and like 30 minutes of someone telling a story. And and those things, actually, I was asking my family yesterday, they still exist. There's 30 minutes on Ukhozi every day where they talk. But now 15 minutes of that is advertising. So clearly, other advertisers have seen value in just that spoken word, right, and having storytelling hours. So I think podcasts, for me, are a great tool. It's another tool. And then as time shifts, and you know how fast the digital economy is moving, there'll be another platform where I think all corporations, if you're interested in telling your story and communicating, you're going to have to follow through. But for right now, sustainability, yeah, and sure, and it's growing. The fact that I was in preparation for this, that Netflix is looking at partnering with Spotify, right? Spotify is the audio, the podcast, as it were. Netflix wants to bring the video elements and get them on their platforms in the States. Tells you that this is growing. Podcasts are going to morph into podcasts already. And what will be in the future is going to be a very interesting space. So for any corporation to ignore podcasts and vodka, or rather vodcasts, is folly. I think all of us have to go to that platform to tell our story. Because in a 5-minute interview with you on a daily news broadcast with Sim Shabalala, the Standard Bank CEO, I don't think there's enough space for him to share the story. So sure. We're excited. We're dabbling very slowly, very cautiously, in supporting podcasting, doing our own, right, and telling it from a Standard Bank perspective. So it's fun. Hits and misses. Some of our podcasts don't get the listenership we'd want, but some explode, right?
And that's something I'd actually like to explore. So it goes back to some of what Tebogo has said, right? So in my understanding, in terms of how much of a disruptor podcasts are. Some would argue it has a lot more intimacy and immediacy, and it covers a part of storytelling or targets audience in a space where traditional media wouldn't ordinarily be able to access. But within its space and how fast moving it is comes the risk of how certain podcasts may veer off, may enter certain spaces where there are not immediate consequences like the regulatory bodies that exist for traditional media. So what is the best way for a brand to truly incorporate a podcast? Is it their own internal podcast where they have all of the gears and movers in place? Or is it when they hop onto an already established brand and kind of piggyback on the immediate impact and intimacy they have with their target audiences? I'm throwing it to you, Debo.
Okay, so the first thing is the issue of culture that I want to touch on, because it speaks to the question that you're currently asking. So when we talk about relevance to a specific culture, and this is to our guest who is in Nigeria. You look at any Nigerian artist, all of the artists are embedded within their culture, and the ones that are doing well internationally, they are all embedded within their culture. It's not a Nigerian artist who is trying to mimic someone from the United States and trying to be a hip-hop artist who's doing hip-hop in English, who are the biggest artists. These are all the people who are embedded within the culture. So what is critical, the first thing that is important within the relevance is understanding the environment, is understanding the culture, is being embedded within the culture and working with people who understand the language of the people. Okay, that is the first thing. The second thing, in terms of looking at your strategy, you can't be too risk averse. You cannot be.
Do you feel the current environment in South Africa doesn't understand what their consumers or what the target audience needs?
Can I jump in?
Before you jump in.
When we do a podcast, for example, Standard Bank, there's no agency we're using. This is all internal Standard Bank staff who are starting. We play with the equipment and exploring. So there's no getting an international agency to come have a conversation, this African conversation. The whole point of it. So the thing about podcasts is credibility and authentic. Probably the big tick phrase is having an authentic conversation. So what we've done with Standard Bank is Standard Bankers talking, and these are people who grew up in South Africa, who know the culture, who are from the culture. So it isn't and one thing about another thing about vodcasts, no one likes perfectly curated vodcasts, right? Or podcast. That's almost a shift away from that. They want that authentic feel. So when Standard Bank does it with people who are from South Africa or in the culture, and we're talking about the economy or whatever the case may be, that to me is authentic. Whatever, and credible conversations, and that's the key thing to podcast.
So what I want to say is that listening is very important, especially when you're in communication. While I was talking, I was trying to finish my point, and then you interjected while I was speaking. And this is the issue that we're having in our country, that brands do not listen. They do not listen to the environment. They think they've got all the answers. And this is not the case. So what I was trying to say, and it's good that you've mentioned the fact that you're not using an agency to place the content onto the podcast. That's very good. But the selection of podcasts, as well as the pace at which you are moving your budget into the podcast, would speak about your understanding of the culture, okay? Now, you cannot be forced to place an advert anywhere where you find that a podcast is not aligned to your brand values. These are things that also need to be considered, right? Because we spoke about a certain big podcast that may not be aligned at the present moment to your brand values. But it is important to understand the holistic culture of South Africa, whether it's the sporting culture, fashion culture, political culture, and then spread your wings amongst that, because I do not think that you are investing enough in a variety of podcasts.
I don't want to cut you off. I'm just thinking about time. Ikuchugo, as you can see, there is a sense of, in the podcast ecosystem, a certain side that is proposing one thing and another. One, is that something you also have observed? And two, in this instance where both sides obviously have something important to offer and where an exchange or partnership could be mutually beneficial. How do brand versus podcast versus media truly collaborate?
Well, so I think the center point would always be the audience, right? When you figure out what you want to tell the audience, you figure out, what you need them to hear to consistently bring them back. And then you can decide if this is something that you want to do internally, or if you want to hop on some other established podcast, much like you would if you were buying media. I would say that I'd reference an example of BetNiger's Home Turf, where it's a company who operates between the intersection of sports and entertainment. And what it does with its podcast is not really to talk about its own offerings, right? It is bringing legends of the game, legends of sports in Africa, Nigeria, former players, present, current footballers, and then just bringing them to the studio to share stories that the public would ordinarily not have heard about, or you wouldn't find on any other medium. And in exchange, the audience laps it up and they want to see this every single week. And every time that, there's an episode that drops, snippets of it go viral on social. There's lots of conversation, and the brand just continues to stretch its visibility. More people start to interact with it. So it all depends on your audience and what you want to serve them. And if you feel like, if we control the channel, we want to have a podcast that becomes ours, that we own, and then we can use it to drive our own business objectives, then by all means. But if you see something that's already established and a section of your audience is on there, and that audience can generate significant revenue for them if you can reach them, then by all means jump on, a third-party platform. It doesn't really matter. All it comes down to is, strategy, understanding who you want to serve, and then what you want to do with it.
Yeah. And how do you then measure success and effectiveness? And do you have a certain timeline in place? Can a brand expect to see some of their core objectives reached in the midterm, in the long term? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I think this is very critical because what one of your guests in the studio had also mentioned is that sometimes they had episodes that didn't go as well as they planned. So it's very important to have stakeholder buy-in. Everybody who is involved, both your CFOs and your CMOs, everybody, pulls in the same direction. And then you put out a roadmap to say, we expect to hit XYZ metrics by so-and-so time, 3 months, 6 months, 10 months. But if you're going in with the understanding that it is an investment. It's an investment, definitely. And then, of course, it's content that you're putting out. No matter how stellar the content is, there's sometimes that people just don't resonate with it. So you have to factor all these things in, and then you have to work on distribution. Distribution is probably the most important thing in this equation. If you get your content right and you're able to adequately distribute it, you have the right people speaking about it, sharing it, just creating that fear of missing out, then it could really start to grow. But ultimately, have stakeholder buy-in so that everybody understands that it may be a long process and it may be a long-term play. And it's not something that maybe after 2 months you're worried that, oh, no, it's not working. And then you want to pull the plug. So.
Yeah. And Ron, what makes a podcast work for a brand? Specifically, I want to zero in terms of access. Is it a tool that is bringing in audiences brands would not normally be able to reach?
I mean, it's one in South African consumption habits is like 18 to 34-year-olds, right? So that's the market where, particularly a bank like ours, wants to talk to them. So it's a perfect audience segment, and it is that market they're looking to be Standard Bank, private bank customers. So it's all about what are you looking for, right? I'm sure if there's another business wanting another segment, it might not fit what they're looking for, and they wouldn't look at a podcast right now. But for us, as it stands and where we want to be in the zeitgeist, it's a perfect fit for us as a bank, being in that podcast space. I think out of everyone who has access to data and internet access, the stat 9 out of every 10 people do listen to some sort of form of podcast or podcast. So it is slap bang in the middle of where we should be amongst a plethora of other. I mean, we do mainstream media is still something Standard Bank's very much invested in. As you know, we're a big partner of even CNBC, so that's critical what we still do. But it's a vector that can't be ignored, and that's what we are playing.
Yeah. And Tebogo, how much or where should podcasts rank in terms of the marketing hierarchy of needs? How much of priority and attention should podcasts have in terms of a brand's approach to its long-term marketing strategy?
Well, I think they need to have a very high focus. I mean, in 2014, when I was speaking at the Global Entrepreneurship Summit, you already noticed the trends. At that point, there were more subscribers of cable television, of social media subscriptions than cable television networks. You had more people on YouTube than on cable television. And you already saw where this thing is going. And now you're seeing currently, you've got YouTube that has over 25 million subscribers in South Africa. And then you have a few million that are watching television, which is, up to about like 10 million people who are subscribed, on the television subscription services. And so you are seeing that shift. If you want, to get a large section of the segment of attention, you need to go to where people are paying the attention. And social media and podcasting is where it is. I think the other benefit of podcasts is that people do not just tune in and tune out easily. People are keeping other people's attention for 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and they're watching the podcast attentively. And in the United States, you're already seeing the trend of brands that are advertising on the podcast themselves. In South Africa, it's not that much, but you do have to give credit to Standard Bank for making that move towards advertising on podcasts and sponsoring podcasts and moving in that direction. And what we need to see as an industry is the industry moving in that direction, because it'll be good for our economy, but it's also going to be good for the brand.
Yeah, and we could argue that the growth that you've mentioned, the numbers you've mentioned, are only going to climb even further. But I'm almost out of time. Just briefly, in one word, what is your advice to a brand that is still hesitant on truly incorporating a podcast?
One word. Well, in one sentence, I think that they need to wake up and smell the coffee. This is where it's at right now. And there's nothing wrong with traditional media. Use all the platforms, but don't be so conservative on social media and podcasts.
Ron?
Yeah, same. It's relevance. If you want to be relevant as a brand in this age and where the consumption habits are of readers, listeners, and viewers, you have to be in the game of podcasting and exploring there. Yeah. If you're not as relevant as you'd like to be.
Yeah. Ikechukwu?
Unfortunately, I would say that podcasts, whether you own them, is not for everyone. Honestly, I think whether or not you decide to go that route is very dependent on what you're offering and your audience. You might find that you're just better served, latching onto some existing podcast and just buy it as you would do, regular media, as opposed to owning it. So one single word I would use is access. Evaluate it and see if it's something that would work, for your business, for your market, your sector, your industry, your product. And then if your results, points in the positive, then by all means go for it. Otherwise, just buy media.
Well, it is certainly undeniable that the power of podcasts is here to stay. All the way from Lagos, Nigeria, to here in Johannesburg, we have extensively explored just the number of changes, the number of growth, and the many opportunities that lie ahead. And that's how we wrap up this episode of Marketing Media Money, where we were discussing podcasts and their effectiveness as part of a holistic marketing strategy. I'd like to thank my guests, Ikechukwu Maduka, the CEO of Nelson Reeds, who joined us via Zoom from Nigeria, Ron Derby, the PR lead for personal brand and private banking at Standard Bank, as well as Tebogo Ditshego, the CEO of Ditshego Media. Don't forget to join the conversation and share your thoughts and opinions on social media using Marketing Media Money. From me, Kiamo Musipili, and the rest of the CNBC Africa team, it's goodbye for now.